Hey everyone, welcome to the brand new series. This is What If. It's Matt.
And it's Zach.
This series is kind of a hypothetical situation that we're going to be going through in music. What happens if this person did this instead of doing that? What if this person stayed with the band instead of leaving? What if this person, I don't know, just what if?
I mean, it's kind of just taking a look at situations in history where something almost happened, whether it was a tour almost happened that could have propelled one band to the next level, but it didn't happen, or someone almost joined that band and it could have changed the course of that band's life, but it didn't happen. And it's just kind of Matt and I going, what if that actually did happen? Would anything have actually changed, or would it have disrupted everything we know about music itself? Because it's kind of crazy that, like, the whole, like, whenever you ask someone, oh, do you regret doing this or you regret not doing that? And they go, listen, everything happens for a reason. Well, this show kind of examines, is that true? Or is that just what you tell yourselves to stop crying at night over some of your bad decisions? I thought that probably a great topic to look at first is something that was literally built. Whether or not it was really going to happen or what they intended to happen or not is questionable, but something that could have happened in the late 90s or mid 90s, but drama pursued and it just disrupted everything. And I'm talking, of course, about the VMAs of 1996. Matt, you remember that well, don't you? Those fun VMA shows.
Are you trying to say that I'm old?
Yes, I am trying to say that you're old. What was the Great War like, Matt? For those who don't recall, well, first off, I mean, the VMAs were always known for some crazy, some random situations happening. But in 1996, months after the very ugly split between Sammy Hagar and Van Halen, suddenly Van Halen appear on stage with none other than their estranged original lead singer, David Lee Roth, to present an award to the best male artist of rock or whatever genre it was. Beck ended up winning. Sorry, spoiler alert. And not to make a terrible pun, but eruption arose at Radio City Music Hall. Holy cow. The original members of Van Halen were finally on stage. Are they finally getting back together? And as fast as the four members appeared on stage, as fast as just kind of just went like that. And it's just kind of one of those, if you're a Van Halen fan, which Matt and I are, it just became so clear that, oh yeah, they hate each other. David Lee Roth is being typical Diamond Dave, just doing his antics, and the rest of the band clearly want to kill him. And quickly after that, they were back at the press, just taking jabs at each other, and they just quietly released the compilation album that they were kind of promoting, and hence why they were there, with 2 songs that they recorded, and they quickly said, yeah, I'm never going to be on stage with them again. Of course, many years later, I think it was 2009, maybe 2008, when they finally reunited with David Lee Roth, but with Wolfgang Van Halen on bass instead of Michael Anthony. So we never got to see the original 4 members of Van Halen on stage together again after 1996. So Matt, I ask you, what if David Lee Roth wasn't a jerk or didn't act like one? What if maybe after, they appeared on stage and they heard the incredible response that they got from those in attendance, from the media, from just all the screaming metalheads at home going, holy crap, Roth is back with Van Halen. What if they decided, you know what? Let's keep riding this out. Let's go on tour and reunite and be Van Halen again.
Honestly, I think it would have fizzled out. I don't think that this would have gone very far.
How far?
Well, you got to remember the time in music, right? 1996 and 96, 97, somewhere in that area, that they might have put out an album. And if they did put out that album, well, what was the world like in music? Like, it changed a lot since 1984. And the days of excess were gone, and it was the grunge and alternative movement. And I think the reception to anything Van Halen would have put out would have been similar to what we got with Metallica in Load and Reload, Well, why are you releasing this type of music and not doing, your first couple of albums over again? Because that's what everybody wants. But, the hot ticket at that time is, that sound. And I don't think that lineup of Van Halen could have produced something that would have made very many waves. Like if you sit here and you analyze the two songs that they put out in 96, 97 ish with Can't Get This Stuff No More and Me Wise Magic, they're okay songs. They're not great. And if you go by that sound for David Lee Roth and the guys, it sounds like they're trying to do what they did with Sammy Hagar, just with David Lee Roth. I don't think blending those two types of sounds together necessarily work. And I listened to Humans Being and the other two songs together. And in listening to that, you can hear that Van Halen with that particular sound in those particular years sound completely different, right? There's so much feeling in a song for a movie soundtrack in Humans Being. It sounds so much better than what they do with Roth. I think they would have put out an album. They would have gone on tour, maybe have done a second album, gone out on tour. And I think those albums would have been received in the same way that A Different Kind of Truth was received. It's like, holy crap, here's new Van Halen. Oh my God, oh my God. And then it's, okay, well, it's all right. It's not great, but we got new Van Halen. And then I think after that lukewarm reception, it might have just fell apart again.
So, while I don't necessarily disagree that it maybe would have fizzled out just because of the personalities involved, I don't know if I agree if it would fizzle out because of the reception. Because I think, well, yes, grunge was at the height of the popularity at that time. In 96, you saw an interesting trend happening in that a lot of those grunge bands were admitting, yeah, I loved 70s classic rock. That's what I grew up on. That's my biggest influence. And you started to see a lot of bands from that era gain a second wind and reunite and basically just play even bigger arenas than before. If you look at a few months before the VMA performance, Kiss came out at the Grammys. And that was in the same year. After Tupac surprised everyone by introducing them, they came out in their makeup, all four original members, and everyone went gaga. A few weeks later, they announced the reunion tour, and they literally became the hottest ticket of the past 2 years. And yeah, they released a mediocre album in 98 that kind of quickly fizzled out, but they ended up gaining a lot of steam with touring for many years to come. And even around that same period, Black Sabbath reunited with Ozzy finally after many years of teasing and one-offs. Fleetwood Mac reunited with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks to huge success. Even the Eagles are back and at full force. So you kind of saw a second coming of 70s classic rock that I think Van Halen could have very much benefited from. Maybe new music wasn't going to be that great. Maybe they would have realized, you know what? We don't need to rush. We could just tour for the next 3 years, make a boatload of money playing stadiums, maybe, given this response. And then, sure, maybe in 98, 99, we release a new album of stuff that, we just had Roth throw vocals on. Ride that out for another few years and see how it goes. I think it was an interesting time period that maybe if egos could have been put aside, maybe it could have worked. But now, I should also say, this is all assuming that it would have even happened because, truth be told, well, yes, it was kind of set up to make people believe that a Roth reunion was bound to happen. Depending on who you asked, the Van Halen brothers had no interest in reuniting with Roth. They really were just looking at this as a one-off and, hey, we're just going to record 2 songs, do a music video with you, answer some questions to the press at the VMAs, see you later. Because depending on who you ask, either they were already auditioning Mitch Malloway, who ended up going on to sing in the band Great White for a few years. So if you ask some other people, Gary Cherone, who ended up becoming Van Halen's new singer and were appearing on Van Halen 3, he was already in the band. And apparently Mitch was saying like, yeah, I actually ended up saying no to Van Halen the second I saw the VMAs and found out, oh, they're with Roth. That's how he found out they were even doing that. And he felt kind of like weirded out by it. So depending on who you ask, they never intended to. But I do kind of have to believe that if Roth didn't act like David Lee Roth, maybe the Van Halen brothers would have stood on stage, heard the response, and going, you know what? Maybe we should hear what our managers have to say about some of the offers they're getting. Maybe we should pursue this. But then again, would we really want to see Van Halen without David Lee Roth acting like David Lee Roth? So who knows? Also, let's fast forward, Matt. Remind me, didn't you say that you saw David Lee Roth back in the band in 2008 or 9?
I did.
What did you think of it?
So David Lee Roth definitely did not sound like himself. He was definitely off on his own planet of whatever key he's trying to sing in, but he still tried to have that energy of the original Van Halen. It was good for what it was. It wasn't overly an amazing show from his perspective. Like, you know, the main attraction for me was Eddie Van Halen and watching him play. That's what really fueled me to go. And it was just an added bonus that David Lee Roth was on vocals for whatever it was worth, because a different kind of truth, like I said, it was okay, but you can still hear that Roth is not able to stay in key. He's not able to rein his vocals back and be with everybody else. He's off doing his own thing.
Yeah, I never got to see them with Roth, but I actually did get to see them. Granted, we've done many Van Halen episodes before, but and we've even done a whole episode of Am I Missing Something dedicated to Sammy Hagar era of Van Halen, Van Hagar. I got to see the Van Hagar reunion in 2004 twice, at the beginning of the reunion tour and at the end. And it's funny, there's been many stories shared about how by the end of the tour, Eddie and Sammy were coming to blows and like literally about to kill each other because Eddie was very much not in good shape health-wise. And I do remember how like that when I saw them in Philadelphia at the beginning of the tour, I was like, yeah, wow, that was there, man, they sound great. And then when I saw them in Atlantic City at the end of the tour, it was, well, they sound good, but man, Eddie seems out of it. Like it's clear that the tour took its toll on them. And we talked about the love-hate of Van Hagar before many times, but it was definitely clear on that tour too that while it received fair amount of attention and love, I went to the second night of the Philadelphia. They added a second show due to demand, and it was clearly not that much demand. Like I got upgraded pretty close to the stage. It's clear that the demand was always for Roth. And even if you look back at that VMA appearance of them just being on stage together for not even playing, just standing next to each other, the insane reception that they got. You could make the argument of, did they dodge a bullet by not going on tour of Roth and it wasn't going to be the same? Or is it a shame they didn't do it because we would have gotten at least one more good tour of Roth being in decent shape?
Well, is it like him being kind of like a trained monkey? Just go stand out on the stage. Let's see what the reception is. Like, was there any backing for it? Was it really meant to happen? Were they really trying to get these guys back together?
I mean, I'm sure the four original members didn't. I mean, other than Roth, who I guess was a little, because like the story also goes that like where things really got crazy. I mean, Eddie was already pissed off at how quote unquote disrespectful Roth acted on stage to everybody other than himself and trying to just hog the spotlight. They kind of had a conversation in the back where Eddie was like, listen, we're not getting back together. I don't know who told you what, but like I have to get a hip surgery. And if we were going to do a reunion, we got to do an album. And I mean, who knows? That could have been it's just an excuse for not wanting to do it, but like it's not happening. And that's where Roth got annoyed and was like, well, don't talk about your hip at the press conference. Like, and they just were like kind of about to like fight at that point. I'm sure Roth thought in the back of his head that was going to lead to a reunion. I also am sure that management and the label and Warner Brothers would not have let them even move forward if they didn't think that they could have used that appearance as an excuse to be like, guys, look at the reception. It's clear we'll make millions by just having you guys on tour for 9 months. Like, let's do it. I'm sure there was no one like behind the scenes going, yeah, this is just them hanging out on stage. And they like Beck, so they wanted to give him an award. Like, I'm sure that people behind the scenes were really hoping that this was going to lead to something. I'm sure.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of times in history where people have done things just for a tour. Like they don't travel together, they don't interact at all. They just get on stage, perform, and leave. I mean, they could have did that, but
I mean, not when your last interaction with someone is. I think Eddie legit said, "Next time I see you, you better be wearing a cup." Like he was literally threatening violence. Like I don't know if keeping them on separate tour buses was going to be enough to convince them to be on stage for 2 hours every night for the next year. Sometimes that's not enough. Or maybe it finally was enough in 2009. I mean, granted, they were trying to get to do a Roth era reunion again in 2007, but then Eddie's health problems just really spiraled out and it delayed the reunion by at least a year or two. But I also think partly that the only reason why again, no backing for this, but I think Eddie Van Halen only agreed to do Van Halen again because he wanted to play with his son. That he really wanted to be in a band with his son, Wolfie. And he wanted to call it Van Halen because, well, that's their last name, so why the hell not? Everyone advised him, like, listen, the only way that this will be successful is if you get Roth back. Because, to my point, the Hagar tour did fine, but not enough to justify Van Halen bringing in another singer. Because at that, I mean, even bring back Hagar, like, they needed Roth in order to tour with Van Halen by the time they decided to do it again.
So let me ask this question, because I've never seen the Hagar era live. Did they do any of the classic material, or did?
Oh, absolutely! It was a great mix.
Okay.
Oh, it was a great mix, and even Sammy Hagar admitted, in his initial run, he like dreaded singing some of the Van Halen the Roth songs, but he kind of like really found his groove singing "Jump" in 2004, and actually, he sounded great singing songs like "Jump" and "Panama." Like he still had Michael Anthony do "Run of the Devil." But I think that was just more of just tradition at that point. Like it was actually a very good mix. And I think, I don't know if it was him that it said, yes, we have to do it. But no, it was honestly that first show on that tour that I saw them. It was actually a very fun show. It was really, it made you appreciate the Van Hagar era while also getting to hear those classic Roth eras with Sammy Hagar, who's, as we've talked about before, a much better singer than Roth. Sorry, not sorry.
So then I guess one of the questions that I have is, what if Gary Cherone actually succeeded in Van Halen? Could it have been a situation like with Miles Kennedy and Slash, where they go out, or even the new Pantera, right? Like we saw them a week or two ago, and Phil Anselmo was on vocals, but Vinnie Paul and Dime both tragically passed away, and their roles are being fulfilled now by Zakk Wylde and I'm losing his name, the drummer for Anthrax,
Charlie Benante.
Yeah, so those two roles are being filled by others. Could it have potentially have been that Van Halen could have continued on in a new direction with a new vocalist who could do it all and put the band out on the road to make the money that they could have potentially made?
I think for them to have been successful, they probably need to have done a better album than Van Halen 3.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, but like, I think it's tough because, truth be told, it's a lightning in the bottle to succeed with a new singer the first time around.
Agreed.
To do it twice is nearly impossible. And Van Halen is almost proof of that. I think it was going to be a tough sell. You could even argue, you kind of touched upon this earlier, that in 95, the love for, they were successful with Sammy Hagar in the late 80s, early 90s, but even that started to fade by 95. It was clear that, like, not only were they having battles with each other, but it was probably not going to last much longer for various reasons either, both because of what was going on in music and just different desires of directions of music. I mean, I really hate to be a pessimist. It would be lovely to think, yeah, maybe if they did, some different songs of Gary, they could have continued on. Or maybe instead of even releasing a new album with Gary, they had just focused on touring with Gary those first 5 years and then did some music. In 1996, the only way Van Halen could have continued on in relevance, or I hate to say even relevancy, but could have continued on successfully, was with Roth back in the band. And I think if you look at the trends of what was going on with fans, there was nostalgia for the 70s. Dazed and Confused, I think that was in 94, maybe 95. That movie came out. I mean, and even if it was 94, the soundtrack, which was basically just an ode to classic rock of the 70s, was still getting played by a lot of new, younger fans. There was just a sense of nostalgia that I think they missed out on by not saying, screw it, Roth will be Roth. Let's just suck it up and make that Van Halen, make that nostalgia money. I think go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that, by them even testing the waters with a response, they screwed themselves. Like if they showed that they really wanted to do this and they really wanted to be serious about it, they wouldn't have jerked around with David Lee Roth at the VMAs. They wouldn't have, had Gary Cherone waiting in the wings, and right after that, I think it's just a situation where everybody involved really didn't know what they wanted and what they could do. Like, I don't think that they actively sat down and said, all right, well, we know that our feelings with David Lee Roth or whatever, because with the songs that they recorded, they had to have some back and forth, and it sounded like that the back and forth really wasn't great with those songs. So why even test the waters with, getting him on stage at the VMAs?
Because money. Because literally a few months before that, Kiss did it.
Yeah, I know, but
I mean, granted, maybe Kiss had a lot more solidified before they ever took the stage at the Grammys, but I would still argue that at that point, I mean, there was some murmurs of Kiss maybe finally getting back together. I mean, granted, the 2 years prior to that, you could argue that they were testing the waters by hosting Kiss conventions that they all actually appeared at and had various members appear at as over the years appear as well, and started teasing the fact that maybe they were open to playing more of the 70s set lists again. But I mean, I still think that in Van Halen's defense, they weren't the first band to just suddenly pop up at a awards show and see how the response went.
Yeah, but they also weren't at each other's throats the way the Van Halen has been.
I mean,
Kiss are the kings of selling out. So if there was money to be made, they're going to make the money.
That's true too.
So I think money talks in that instance.
Is that more credit to Eddie Van Halen then, that he stuck to his guns and said, "Screw this! I can already tell this is a disaster," and pulled out before it was too late? Though you could argue it was already too late.
I think they should have tried to work on the relationship between all of them prior to getting on that stage. And I think that, recording those two new songs and not having a great relationship, recording those two songs was proof enough that it's like, this isn't going to work.
It did sound like, from what I understand, that because the way the story goes, that like the label told Roth, hey, listen, we're doing this compilation, FYI. And Eddie Van Halen was like, let me talk to David. Let me see where his mind's at. And they talked and got along well enough that Eddie invited Roth to come to the rehearsal space, and things got along well enough for them to even at least rehearse together, the four of them, on a new song or two, and maybe even some classics. So maybe they really did genuinely think, you know what? This could be a good viable option. He kind of seems like a different guy. And then the second they got on stage, Diamond Dave suddenly popped up again, and they went, oh, there he is. There's that dickhead. He almost tricked us.
I mean, it's very possible.
I could see that. I could see Diamond Dave seeing the cameras and seeing the applause and going, yeah, I'm back, baby, and then just like freaking taking over. Whereas, because mind you, it wasn't like David Lee Roth was really doing all that great in the 90s on his own. So maybe he was definitely more eager to hang out and be nice and ask, hey, so how are the kids, Eddie? Yeah, they're doing good? Marriage okay? Oh, no, I can relate to those problems. And then it was the second they got to Radio City Hall, that's when Diamond Dave goes, get out of the way. It's my show. It's about me tonight.
Yeah. But I think getting back to the core topic of what if Van Halen could have gotten past there and could have, they could have coincided and done some more music. I think one positive that would have come out of this is that we wouldn't have had to suffer through Van Halen 3.
Yeah, well, yeah. Or maybe we would have, and it just would have been a different name title and it would have been just with Roth on vocals.
I think it would have stayed the same vibe with the two new songs that they put out, because
fair.
Everything 96, 97 Van Halen was that weird compilation of trying to do alternative with Eddie Van Halen's playing and that Sammy Hagar vocal style, because that's what they all are, right? If you put humans being me, wise magic, and can't get this stuff no more together, they all sound like they could be on one album together, and it didn't have to be on a greatest hits album.
Do you think one positive to them not pursuing a career is that it would have just buried Van Hagar further? Because, I mean, granted, it really wasn't until the 2004 tour that it really started making people remember, 5150 was a pretty damn good album, and there were some good songs on there. We give Van Hagar a little too much crap. I mean, I kind of picture it almost as if, like, with Black Sabbath getting back together with Ozzy, there was a good decade plus of people completely forgetting that there was a singer other than Ozzy in Black Sabbath. Granted, that was partly because Black Sabbath did a damn good job at making you forget. Yes. But, I mean, you could make the argument that Roth reuniting with Van Halen for a successful tour in 1996 would have further just buried Sammy Hagar's time and Van Halen further.
See, I don't necessarily think so. I think that the shadow cast by Ozzy over the rest of Black Sabbath is way, way, way bigger than what with the shadow cast by David Lee Roth, because Sammy Hagar, for all intents and purposes, and I know that Van Halen fans are going to say, oh, they sounded great, they were this, they were that, but they were a different style of band, right? They were completely different. They went in a different direction. It wasn't all about getting like the girls, and it wasn't about, excess, and it wasn't about being larger than life. It was a straight ahead rock band doing rock band things and playing rock music with one of the greatest guitarists that ever lived. That's what Van Halen was with Sammy Hagar. And I think that because they went so far in a different direction, that you could have that clear dividing line where 1984 was the last time you heard the David Lee Roth influence, and then it went into something completely different with Sammy Hagar. And that's great. And that's probably where Black Sabbath went to a fault, where they kind of stayed true to what Black Sabbath was and what the fans wanted, rather than trying to take it in a little bit more of a different direction with Dio.
So I feel like I disagree with the Black Sabbath comment, because I feel like you could listen to the Dio era stuff and that, there's definitely some similar elements to Black Sabbath, but it was a little bit slightly different of a type of metal. But that's also a side comment. I want to go back to the Van Halen argument, in that I would make the argument in regards to Van Hagar, in that I actually do kind of feel that, well, yes, Roth's presence was definitely not as huge as Ozzy because he was such a successful solo artist, but it's interesting because over the past few years since we did our "Am I Missing Something" episode of Van Hagar, I've kind of just uncovered a lot of articles at the time and gossip stuff that implied, you know what, maybe Sammy Hagar with Van Halen wasn't as successful as they would like you to believe. Like you looked at some of the numbers. I mean, apparently a lot of these, like there was a lot of magazine articles, like I think Kerrang ran one in '88 where they were saying that some tension between Sammy and Eddie was already starting to appear because the Monsters of Rock tour that they were doing with Scorpions, Doc, and young Metallica and Kingdom Come was not selling as well as they would have liked it to. That you could even already start seeing that by the time, like I mentioned before, by the time they did Balance in 1995, their popularity definitely dwindled because of them being so further away from the original Roth era sound. Mind you, as I made this argument in the past episodes before, you listen to some of the songs on 1984, and it's actually not too much of a jump to believe that the same band minus Roth made 5150. Like, I'll Wait could have easily been a Sammy Hagar song with Van Halen. Like, there is definitely a clear intention of where the band was heading, even with Roth in the band. So, I don't know. I feel like, because I guess another question is, would them reuniting with Roth in 96 improved their status as legends any further? You can make the argument no, because even without touring actively, Van Halen was still one of the most popular bands.
I think that you got your answer already with what would have happened, is that you would have gotten that petering out, of their popularity. I don't think that their popularity would have grown anymore if they reunited. I think you would have gotten some shows. I think you would have gotten some press coverage. And I think that if anything, if it went on for more than 5 years, 6 years, that you would have seen maybe the popularity of Van Halen maybe die out a little bit, or kind of get what you got with a different kind of truth. Like you eventually got that big, overwhelming, oh my God, Van Halen is back with David Lee Roth. And while Michael Anthony's not here, oh my God, David Lee Roth is back and we're going to get new music and a tour and this, that, and the other thing. And it was just kind of like, it's okay. Those songs aren't played on the radio anymore. Nobody wants to hear those songs. They only want to hear the ones from the 70s and the 80s and some Hagar tunes. And that's really about it. Nobody wants to hear that later day Van Halen because it's okay, but it's not what everybody remembers and like really likes. Just like you have those, and I'm going to go back to Metallica because it's another really clear dividing line. Like you have the first 4 albums, and then you have the Black Album, which is like, some people love it, and that's where I became the biggest Metallica fan of the world because of the Black Album. And some people are like, well, that's where they went mainstream and they started to, sell out and blah, blah, blah. And then Load and Reload happened. And, then you kind of have, a lot of dividing opinions about mid-career Metallica at that point. Like right now we're kind of in like the latter career of Metallica with the new one, 72 Seasons, Death Magnetic, and Hardwired to Self-Destruct. But those first 4 and then the Black Album, that's classic Metallica. Everybody wants to hear that stuff. Anything after that, it's a divided opinion. And I think that the first era of Van Halen up to 1984, you have the hardcore, this is it. This is what I love. This is Van Halen will never get any better than this. But then you have Sammy Hagar who came in, and then Sammy Hagar and his stuff, some people love that era of Van Halen. And, once they get to the end with Balance, that's like, okay, well, Van Halen is ever going to get any better. And then, well, they didn't with Van Halen 3. But I think with A Different Kind of Truth, everybody kind of got like that one last pop, and it's like, it's okay. We got what we kind of wanted, but it's not what we want to hear. We want to hear all the old stuff again. So I think every band is going to have that, but I just don't think that you were going to get anything more of Van Halen if they stayed together after 1996.
Do you think if Van Halen recorded A Different Kind of Truth with Gary Cherone in 1998, that album and that band and that era of the band would have been more popular? Because you could make the argument, I mean, one of the biggest critiques of A Different Kind of Truth was a lot of those songs were actually stuff that like the band had written and even kind of demoed back in the early days, or like some of the riffs were even just stuff that Eddie Van Halen had recorded for other projects and reused. So a lot of it was, and you could make the arguments like, yeah, I mean, it's just them keeping in the essence of what Van Halen used to be, and isn't that good? And then some were like, no, that's just legit, like taking old content and repurposing it. Do you think though that with a slightly better singer like Gary Cherone, but with that kind of like old school Van Halen influence, it would have been a bigger hit in 1998 as opposed to in 2012 when no one really cared about? I mean, the idea of a new Van Halen album might have been exciting, but in the end, it didn't really matter because it was Roth toward the end of his prime.
Possibly. That's
a what if right there too.
It's definitely a possibility. Like if we want to go down that road, like, okay, well, they didn't get back together. Okay, so how do we make Gary Cherone more successful? Maybe if instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and doing something, you kind of introduced Cherone with, and I'm sure Van Halen fans are going to roast me on this because I just don't know, because I just could care less about Gary Cherone and Van Halen. But, maybe if they introduced him with, like you suggested, some stuff that Eddie did, possibly.
Maybe like, I'm just thinking like this, like one of the better, more impressive songs off of A Different Kind of Truth was Chinatown. I'm wondering, man, what if Gary Cherone sang that? Because Extreme is a band that does not get enough credit for being as good as they actually were. Many people just remember, and again, I'm going to get crapped on for this too, but many people, for the most part, remember Extreme for more than Words, a acoustic ballad. But Nuno is actually one of the best guitarists out there. In fact, even a close friend of Eddie's before he passed away, like, he's a phenomenal guitarist. Gary's actually, on paper, is actually a perfect fit for Van Halen. He, has the range of Hagar, but a little bit more of Roth's rock edge. Like, he actually, in theory, should have been a good fit for Van Halen at the time. It just kind of makes you go, man, the songs just weren't there. Or maybe it was doomed, to your point, it was doomed from the beginning because they decided, oh, let's go to the VMAs of Roth. So automatically fans were pissed off because they didn't get the Roth reunion that they had teased and dangled in front of them. So maybe they screwed Cherone the second they appeared on the VMAs.
Here's an interesting take. What if instead of David Lee Roth appearing on the VMAs, they announced the new Van Halen lineup with Gary Cherone at the VMAs?
Ooh.
Could that have led to more success? Huge platform, a lot of people watching.
That is a huge hot what if. Here's where I'm leaning towards it still might not have moved the needle as much as it could have. Because what you just suggested, as enticing and titillating as that is, dare I say, a few years later, 2002, you could say Axl Rose did the exact same thing, where he performed with his new Guns N' Roses version. He did a huge premiere of his new version of Guns N' Roses. And there was initial excitement for it, but then quickly, a lot of critics were like, oh, but yeah, I do kind of miss Slash. And Axl, man, he was breathing kind of heavily on stage there. And then it led to a tour that didn't really sell so well and led to Axl Rose doing his infamous no-show in Philadelphia. So, but then you can make the argument that maybe the band wasn't in good shape to really perform at the 2002 VMAs. Maybe, to your point, they could have rocked the house with Gary Cherone at the VMA. Oof, that is an interesting what if.
Because you got to figure, what was it, like 6 years prior, Extreme 2 came out with More Than Words. So it was fairly still new, 6 years old at the point, and they could have played off that pop.
Well, Extreme kind of, though, you could maybe even make the argument that maybe even that alone was another reason, another strike against Van Halen 3, because people who knew Extreme very well knew that they were actually a very talented band. But to the average, oh, I'm grunge, but I appreciate my favorite band of the Seattle sound admitting that they love 70s rock, maybe they don't want to see the singer of More Than Words with Van Halen. Maybe that actually would have been a turnoff, seeing them with a hair metal singer who, I hate to call Extreme one-hit wonder, but at the time, they kind of were getting lumped into that scene. Maybe that, I actually think back to even like in '92 when Jimmy Page decided to do an album with David Coverdale.
Mm-hmm.
And on paper, that should have been like a dream come true. But at the time, everyone associated David Coverdale not with being the great rock singer that he was with Deep Purple and most of Whitesnake, but rather than the Here I Go Again singer of the hair metal band Whitesnake. And it didn't do well because people just associated that more. And I remember someone said like, oh, that's such an odd pairing. I'm like, no, that's actually a perfect pairing. Just came out at the wrong time. It came out too soon after hair metal was considered DOA and untouchable. So maybe in '96 it was too soon, or even '98 it was too soon to be associated with the hair metal scene again.
So do you think that maybe the problem is not necessarily with the timing of Gary Cherone, but that he was a name? So
no, I think it was. I think it goes back to timing in that I think at the time he was associated with the hair metal scene. I think going back to your initial what if question now of what if Van Halen surprised everyone by doing a performance with their new singer, Gary Cherone. I actually think there could have been a chance though that Gary, like I'm envisioning, what if they did a 3-song medley of Jump, a new song sandwiched by Jump and Panama. And Gary Cherone did so amazing on stage that he won everyone over with his vocal chops. Maybe he could have done that. Or maybe everyone would have been like, wait, is that the guy who'd sing More Than Words? He's still around? Like, I think timing-wise, maybe if in the 2000s, when hair metal was a little bit more acceptable again and kind of considered classic rock, maybe they could have turned it around with Gary Cherone.
So I'm gonna
too soon in the '90s. Maybe it was just too soon for Van Halen to come back in the late '90s. Maybe they should have gone on a much longer period of nothing.
I can kind of see that, but then again, I'm gonna go to where I think that that introducing a new lead singer was probably done in the best way that I've ever seen done with Miles Kennedy, right? Because Slash was doing his solo stuff, but in doing all of his solo stuff, of course, he's playing the Guns N' Roses classics. So Miles was on his compilation album with like, I think it was 2 tracks or 3 tracks on it on the first one, whatever it was. But he was on there. And then he was tapped for the project. And then it was slowly melded into doing all the Guns N' Roses classics.
But that's different.
How's it different?
That's different. It was Slash introducing who was going to be singing his solo project.
But
it was not Guns N' Roses introducing a new replacement for Axl Rose.
This was also kind of to the same thing that Pink Floyd is going through right now with the Roger Waters doing his own thing for Dark Side.
That's completely separate too. That's just an asshole deciding to re-record a classic album out of spite.
But I think that it's Slash's take on the Guns N' Roses songs, even though, Slash is one of the figureheads of Guns N' Roses. And of course, his solos are going to sound perfect because it's him playing them. But you still need somebody to sing Axl's parts. And that's where Miles's interpretation comes into play. I think that if Gary Cherone was going to be introduced, he needed to be put in a place to be successful. And
the only way that would have been in that scenario, the only way it would have worked is if Van Halen was not called Van Halen. If it was Eddie Van Halen's solo band, and here's Gary Cherone singing some Van Halen songs plus solo material. I actually disagree. That's a completely different. It wasn't Slash trying to slowly form his own version of Guns N' Roses. It was Slash wanting to do a solo album, but knowing, well, if I want to sell tickets, I gotta play some Guns N' Roses songs. In fact, as the years went on, he slowly stopped playing Guns N' Roses songs because he was touring with Guns N' Roses again, so he could justify not playing it with his solo band. It'd be one thing if it was even if it was Velvet Revolver slowly coming back with a new singer, and it was Miles, but it's not the same. Sorry, Matt.
I think that if you gave Gary Cherone the time, and you introduced him on the stage and performing at the VMAs, it would have legitimized him way more than anybody would know. And then going into an album, he would have had a chance to be more successful. Instead of, here's David Lee Roth, here's a couple of new songs on this compilation album. Okay, he's on the stage with us. Okay, that ain't going to work. All right, well, Gary Cherone's our new singer, and then here's a new album.
Oh, it definitely would have done him much better service if they went that route. I think in the end of the day, though, the songs still would have needed to be better than what they were on Van Halen 3. But I agree, anything would have been better for Gary Cherone than Van Halen showing up the VMAs with David Lee Roth and then that imploding. And it would have 100% been better for Gary if he even did a half decent job playing, even if he just got to perform at the VMAs or even stand next to the Van Halen guys at the VMAs. That still would have done him more justice or service than what ended up actually happening, without question. Whether it would have led to the third coming of Van Halen and get many successful years of Van Halen with Gary Cherone, I don't know. That one I have a harder time saying absolutely, but it definitely would have been a better shot than what they ended up doing. And I think it would have been interesting, especially it would have been interesting what song choices Van Halen would have done with Gary at the VMAs in 1996, knowing that classic rock was the hip thing again. With that in mind, though, one last question, what if questions I wanted to pose to you. Because we talked about also whether Gary Cherone really was the right guy, considering, his attachment to the hair metal scene and how hair metal was definitely not in at that point. Do you think Van Halen would have done better with a different well-known name? Maybe someone who also came from the 70s rock scene, or maybe even a singer who had kind of experienced some success with a 90s band, giving them that youthful edge with the understanding of, no, this, he's going to sing just like Roth or Hagar, but you also know him from this 90s rock band. Do you think they would have had more success in that route? Or did they need someone like Gary Cherone?
I think they do need somebody from like the 80s or the 70s. I don't think that anybody in the 90s would have been able to help them out that way. Like, you have some great singers, but I mean, just to throw a name in there, like, do you really think that somebody like Chris Cornell would have been able to help Van Halen? I don't think so.
Oh God, wouldn't that have been hold on.
That would have been a mismatch.
No, I don't think it would have worked. You see, now you got me excited for the idea of hearing Chris Cornell singing Ain't Talking About Love. That actually would have been kind of badass.
But okay, you're picturing one song. Can you picture the entire set like that?
I could picture him sing. I actually could. I actually would have loved to have heard Chris Cornell singing "Why Can't This Be Love."
Go back to Van Halen 1.
I could hear him singing Panama. I could sing. That actually, you know what? I'll even be as bold to proclaim it. I could actually envision Chris Cornell kicking ass with Van Halen. Maybe not as a full-time gig and not at the expense of singing, not singing with Soundgarden at the time. Hell, who could have really thought Chris Cornell singing with Rage Against the Machine members being all that great? And we ended up getting some pretty damn good songs with Audioslave.
That was also still kind of in the same style that he was accustomed to. I think Van Halen is totally different.
Yeah. It would have been freaking cool to hear what Chris Cornell and Eddie Van Halen could have done together, though.
No doubt about it.
That could have been interesting.
Right, but that would have so if Van Halen wanted to do alternative chops, yes, then I can say if you were willing to abandon some of the older stuff, then that might have worked.
I think you're undercrediting Chris Cornell.
I'm not undercrediting Chris Cornell. I'm just saying that the music that goes along with Van Halen and the style of vocals that Chris Cornell is really good in, I don't think necessarily mesh.
I don't know.
I think square peg, round hole.
For instance, I know Billy Corgan was being a huge fanboy of Van Halen in the 90s. That I couldn't picture him singing with Van Halen. I want Anthony the 10-song style guy. I would love to hear him do a version of Chris Cornell singing with Van Halen. Recently also, Glenn Hughes, who sang and played in Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, a classic rock guy, revealed that he actually was talking to Eddie about joining Van Halen and replacing Roth, but they went with Sammy Hagar for various reasons. And Hughes even admitted that, listen, if I was sober, different story. But at the time, I was not sober. I'll pose to you, Matt. So forget about the 90s, because I think we disagree about a singer from the 90s of relevancy fitting in with Van Halen. If you were to try to repackage Van Halen in 1996, Sammy Hagar just left, Roth's not going to come back, and that, you can't just hire some unknown singer. If you were hired to try to find someone from the 70s with their own little notoriety who would actually be a good fit for Van Halen and kind of help them move forward, is there a singer that you would have loved to have seen Van Halen potentially do an album with?
So one name that I for some reason just keeps echoing back in my head. I don't know if it's because you mentioned Jimmy Page before, but Robert Plant.
I mean, that's a huge just...
Do you want to knock people out of their seats? There you go.
Man, I have no idea how that scenario could ever even happen in the real world, but God,
that's not what this is about.
No, I get it. And you're right. That would have been freaking... I'm going to do another hot take. I feel like Chris Cornell is a better fit for Van Halen than Robert Plant.
I don't think so.
I mean, it would have been cool to hear Eddie Van Halen try to do a Led Zeppelin song also.
Yes, it would have.
God, could you imagine? Oof. I actually would have... I mean, this is also kind of different styles of hard rock music too, but also just knowing that, at the time, Rob Halford was going through different projects and even, had been tapped to do a few shows with Black Sabbath when they needed a singer. I feel like Rob Halford with Van Halen could have been an interesting project.
I could see that happening.
Granted, it's not really 70s music, but it's more in the 80s style, but I feel like that could have been interesting. But yeah, here we are going down the rabbit hole of what if.
Yes.
Well, I think that's a good time to ask you, listeners, what if? Are we just going mad here? Tell us some of your scenarios and what you think could have happened if Van Halen actually proceeded reuniting with Roth, or other scenarios of what would you have liked to have seen at the 1996 VMAs instead of them reuniting with Roth on stage? What could have been of late 90s Van Halen if some things happened differently? Let us know on Facebook, X/Twitter if you're old school like us, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, at Epic Footnote, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel where we talk a lot about Van Halen. Like, I lost track of how many episodes we've done about Van Halen. But go to our YouTube channel, subscribe to at Epic Footnote, find out for yourselves. And a big special thank you to Lucky 13 Beard Co.
Log on to lucky13beardco.com if you've ever wanted to dabble in beard balms and oils. These are the guys you want to go to, one of the best on the internet. They continuously surprise me with the new scents that they have, and their formulation for the beard oil just leaves you feeling really good. And we're going to help you smell epic because we've got our own beard oil with them. It is the Lemmy, a tribute to Lemmy from Motorhead, bourbon, tobacco, cola, and leather. It is going to leave you smelling epic, feeling amazing, and we're going to give you 10% off of your entire order. Just use the code EFP10 at checkout. 10% off the entire order. Lucky13, the number, beardco.com.
And if you want to support us more to help us keep doing episodes like this and more podcasts, go to the link in our bios on any social media platform. Well, you'll find a link to our merch site. You can buy Epic Footnote t-shirts, hats, hoodies, coffee mugs with our lovely little cool logo on it. It's a great way to also just support us, but also to let your friends know that you listen to two guys talk a lot about Van Halen. And before I leave, one more time, Anthony Vincent of 10 Second Songs. I challenge you. What would a Van Halen song sound like with Chris Cornell's vocals on it? I challenge you, Anthony Vincent. I'll let you even choose which Van Halen song you choose, whether it's a Van Hagar era or a Roth era one. Maybe both. Make a demo out of it. Make it happen, Anthony Vincent, and I'll get you a free t-shirt of Epic Footnote. Boom. Challenge right there and then. And thank you all so much for listening. And we hope you join us for another episode real soon.
See ya.